Hi, everyone. This is BritSimon. So I wanted to do a video to explain some aspects of the lawsuits that they're going to be focusing on, and using some data from the past to actually explain this. And what prompts me to talk about this was listening to the Impact team on their live video this week. And Charles said something which is sort of right. And, I wanted to sort of provide him with the data to support his argument to an extent, but also point out what I think is going to be the response from the government. What he said was that the processing should work in a quarterly way. And that's sort of right. That's what the government has described before in some of the declarations, that roughly speaking, you divide the 55,000 visas up, and you would expect a quarter of those visas to be issued in the first quarter of the year, a quarter in the second year, a quarter in the second quarter of the year, and so on, right? So that your processing should be spread over the complete year. And as he points out, the reason they are filing now early, there's a couple of reasons for that. They don't want to be so late that the government lawyers or the judge says, well, why did you wait so long to file the case? You could see the damage being done. They don't want to wait that long. And they also wanted to sort of wait and see the damage that was being done. So the damage is irrefutable and obvious. And I think we're close to that point. I personally don't think we're quite there yet. I think we're on the cusp of that, but I understand why they're filing early. They filed early in DV2021, and I think it paid off for them because their lawsuit in the Go lawsuit is finalized. It's finished already, whereas the Good Luck case, for example, is not going to be finished until past April, probably, or April. So, but what I wanted to show was this useful bit of data. Now, let me just show you where this comes from. For a start, I'm going to show you a couple of things. First of all, let me share my screen and add the screen in here. No, I'll make it bigger than that. There you go. Right. So Save Diversity Visa, as you probably all know, have published data. And one of the things that they've done is they've ingested the official numbers from the government monthly statistics. That you can actually find these statistics. If you just Google monthly statistics, and you'll get to this page, right? And the monthly statistics is visa issuances for immigrant and non-immigrant, but I'm interested in immigrant, obviously. And each month they publish the numbers of how many visas they've issued. And if we look at the recent data, for example, in the November data, this is immigrant visa classes, and they list the number of DV cases, which, as we know, is like next to nothing. I mean, you have to actually search for it because they've done such a shitty job. Right, so Almaty, for example, had one DV case in November issued, and if we search again, you can see there's one in Ankara, one in Bogota. You get the point. There's two visas issued in Chisinau. You get the point. This is official data coming from the government, and what I believe Nguyen has done. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Nguyen. What Nguyen has done is imported that data and then put it into this Tableau visualization so that we can understand what the data is really telling us. And it's pretty useful because you can compare what they've done over the pre-pandemic years to what they've done since the pandemic, right? And the colors have changed here a little bit because in the reports, they used to refer to DV1, 2, and 3, which are the three visa classes. DV1 is the main applicant, DV2 is the spouse, and DV3 is other derivatives. That's the actual designation of the visa type you get when you're issued a DV visa. They changed that in terms of reporting, so they classed all of those together for DV 2021, which is why there's this sort of solid green color here. Whereas before we could see the number of derivatives and spouses as well as main selectees in the data, right? So what we've got here is basically 4 years worth of data for DV lottery cases only, starting in October of 2017, which is the beginning of the DV 2018 year. And the reason he started there is if we look at, if we go back and look at the actual data, the data is available from DV from fiscal year 2017, but it's only back to March. It wasn't a complete year. So he, I presume, chose not to process this data because it was only a partial year. And he's included 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. He hasn't yet included 2022 data, and the government themselves have only published the data for October and November issuances, which we know is very low. But I'm looking forward to seeing this visualization with 2022 numbers on there as well. As we move forward, it's going to be very interesting, and I'll show you why. So back to the visualization then. So if we look at this period of time as a year, you can see this. The first point I wanted to make is that Chuck's assumption that they should work roughly a quarter is not quite correct. If we look at 2018, we can see that it's almost expected that the first 3 months of the year would be quieter than later months of the year. And it is pretty much a certainty that in August and September, the numbers will be quite high because they try and close out the AP cases if they can in August and September of each year. So that doesn't necessarily relate to the number of interviews held. It relates more to the number of cases that they can issue. But you can see the point here. Chuck's point is sort of right, but not exactly right. And that is the not exactly piece that I think they're going to throw back and say, look, it's not, it doesn't have to be a quarter. It doesn't have to be, 14,000 or 13,000 something visas per quarter. We can do, 10,000 in quarter one and 14,000 in quarter two and so on. And the data from a pre-pandemic year like 2018 supports that principle, right? However, you can also see that in the first 3 months of the year in 2018, they issued nearly 3,000 in October, nearly just over 3,000 in November, and just under 3,000 in December. So even in that first 3 months in DV 2018, they processed nearly 10,000 visas in the first 3 months. We got 194, right? So Chuck's point is correct, absolutely correct. The amount of work that the amount of effort that the government put in basically cost us the first 3 months of the year, and that point is absolutely right. I just don't want to sort of focus too much on this quarter thing because that's actually not, there's no technical justification for that, right? But it's very, very clear that Chuck's point is right. 194 is a pathetic excuse for an effort. It's no effort at all, and it's a disgrace. It's cost us probably 10,000 visas, right? Just the fact that they didn't do that, and that 10,000 visas is going to hurt us at the end, right? The amount of time they wasted in October, November, December is going to hurt us later because there isn't time to catch up. Then the other thing you can see is that they can issue roughly, just look at this sort of middle range here, they can issue about 4,000 visas per month. That's along the lines with my expectation of what they can do. We can actually see, if you go to another website, Sarthisius's website, and you go to the data, let's just bring up one of these years. If I brought up 2018 data here, and scroll down, and what you can see is you can see how many notification letters they sent in each of the months in previous years. That's very valuable because it tells us what the capacity of the system is. And I can tell you that in, I think it's August of 2018 is one of the highest numbers I've seen. If you just download that, or I'll download that for a second, I'll bring that up in the spreadsheet. Bring that across, and you can see how many visas sorry, how many interviews they performed in any given month, right? How many 2NLs they sent out. So in August of 2018, they sent out 3,681 or 3,680 rather 2NLs. That's pretty good. That's one of the highest numbers I've seen. In 2018, 2017, 2019, etc. That is a lot of interviews. By the way, some of you will be saying, yeah, but in DV2020, and some of you will say they issued 7,000 visas in 2020, so they must have done like 3,500 interviews. No, they didn't. They only sent out about 1,000, just over 1,000 2NLs for September of 2020, DV2020. The rest came from cases that were already scheduled, cancelled from earlier on in the year, etc., from AP cases and that sort of thing. Cases pushed through very rapidly. So in terms of 2NLs actually sent out by the government, by KCC, in that final 3-week period, it was only about 1,000 cases, roughly about 2,000 people. So 5,000 people came from existing scheduled cases. So if 3681 or 3680 is the, let's say that's the sort of the high point, we know how many interviews they should be able to schedule on a given month, considering a sort of fully enabled system, not a system which is hurting by COVID and everything else. So that is going to be pretty much, I mean, if we see this sort of capacity, we'll be doing very, very well. If we see 3,600 interviews being set up in March or April of this year, that will be a very impressive performance. And it would be very difficult to complain about that in those months. But what we can do is point to October, November, December, January and February, where they've just done very little work and haven't issued anything like enough. Okay, so we have the data, we have all sorts of data, right? And the visualization that's here is very useful to sort of understand how that flows over the year. So that I just talked you through the 2018 year. We talked about the first 3 months, then the middle months, Q2 and Q3. You can see roughly what goes on there. And then the final push to the end in August and September, which, as I mentioned, is not necessarily about the peak of interviews scheduled in August 2018. It's as much to do with the AP cases closing, being closed in September mainly. So that's a pretty good effort. And you can see that they actually issued almost 6,000 visas in that final effort, right? Let's just talk through 2019. Something interesting happened in 2019, DV 2019, I should say. So you can see the first 3 months of the year started off in the normal way, where October, November, December are quieter, but still they were issuing almost 3,000 visas in December, 1,800 or so in October, right? So it was going pretty well. And then there was this massive cliff, and they suddenly did almost no work in January. And you can see that in March, it was recovering, and then it sort of recovered at a much sharper angle later on that year. And you could ask, what the hell happened there? Well, I know exactly what happened there. My original noticing of the document procedure that they put in place was I published this article in November of 2018. Now, November is when they're scheduling interviews for January. And so I had noticed, and I think the new document procedure was introduced around about the first few days of November 2018. And it basically said, look, unless you've got your documents processed, you're not going to get interviewed. And so they just introduced this new procedure from nowhere. I mean, it wasn't announced, it wasn't planned, nobody knew what the hell this was all about. And so all of a sudden, interviews dropped off a cliff, right? And it was because many people, just didn't have time to react to this new procedure. Some people did, and so there were some interviews held in January, but you can see that they issued less than 1,000 and then spent the rest of the year trying to catch up with their disastrous decision to implement this document procedure later on in the year, and issued an enormous number in September, really trying to catch up. But there's no doubt about it, the document procedure caused them both a short-term impact, which they had to sort of catch up with, and frankly, a long-term impact. The document procedure was a mess. It was badly implemented and a bad idea, frankly. It was to try and stop people from going to interview without being properly qualified, but still, it was just, even though it was well intentioned, it was a bad idea. Then you can see DV2020. You can see that was going along nicely until March and April. In the middle of March, COVID hit. Embassies were instructed to close, I think, on March 20th. And so there were some cases that were still hanging over. There was still some issuances that happened, in March and April, because there were some cases that were processing and went through AP, etc. But there was then basically no cases until the lawsuit of the Gomez lawsuits essentially forced the government to do what they could to try and issue as many visas as possible. And that's how we got 7,000 visas issued in September. That was entirely due to that. Okay, and then DV 2021. Of course, we had the issuance bans. We had, the whole thing was a mess. We had lawsuits again. The lawsuits opened up, the operations. And so we were able to start getting some visas being issued in April and May. And you can see what happened, as we went towards the end of the year. None of these visas would have been issued without the lawsuit in DV 2020, and none of these visas would have been issued in DV 2021. So this is why I always get pissy with people that say, "Oh, lawsuits don't do anything." Or show me that lawsuits have done anything. Well, all of these people that got issued in DV 2020 or DV 2021 in those blocks they're all thankful for the lawsuits. So regardless of the reserved visas, none of these visas would have been issued without the lawsuits. Because there was a complete ban on issuances, which you can see, by the way. I've also got this visualization turned on for other immigrant classes. You can see essentially, there was nothing being issued until the government started to sneakily at first work on other IV cases, and then eventually obviously implemented the tiered prioritization scheme. So you can see there was a sort of an increase then, but for a long period of time there were no immigrant visas being issued at all. Okay, so I'm grateful to Noam for that visualization, because it allows us to sort of go through and understand that. And this is stuff that I understood implicitly anyway, but it's helpful to be able to explain it to you guys, right? Now, I'm hoping Noam will ingest the 2022 data. We can see that, and we can compare the activity on DV-related work to non-DV immigrant visas, which we should be doing, because part of the other thing is, are any embassies still doing the tier 4 prioritization? Well, in order to answer that, we need the data into a tool like this, so that we can figure out, well, here's an embassy that is increased massively their non-DV immigrant cases, but they're doing very little on DV. Why is that? How are they able to interview, some of these other immigrant cases and not DV? That will lead us towards an understanding of which embassies are working with tier 4 type prioritization, which would still be illegal. So that's the data. I'm hoping that's useful to you. The other thing I just wanted to show you was a couple of things on Save Diversity Visas site. Firstly, by the way, their lawsuit FAQ here is very well written. It's a discussion of the DV 2020 and DV 2021 cases. If you're considering entering a lawsuit, you would do very well to come and read this to understand what happened in DV 2020 and 2021. Now, I know the team at Save Diversity Visa have been very outspoken about no more lawsuits, right? They had this no more lawsuits campaign, and they and I disagree on that point, at least up until recently. But this particular FAQ, this FAQ, has a very nice breakdown, very accurate breakdown, I would say, about what happened in the previous lawsuits, who did get helped, who didn't get helped, and that sort of thing. And I think it's a realistic point of view, which you would do well to read here. I don't think there's anything on here I just disagree with at all. And it's a more open-minded stance than just saying no lawsuits, which, to be honest, is not. It's not a valid perspective to take. We need some lawsuits. We're going to need some lawsuits. So some people will need some lawsuits. The other thing that I wanted to discuss on this video was I downloaded the current data, because the other aspect is I want to correct an understanding that some of you have that things are going well, and that visa bulletins are about to go current and all this sort of thing. I don't think some of you understand how bad things are right now. And I'm not trying to depress anyone. I just want to make it clear to people exactly where we stand. So hopefully, if you're watching this video, if you've listened to my videos before, you understand about holes, and you understand about the response rate, and you understand that cases are being scheduled within the current ranges, right? Within the numbers that are current at this time. But the thing I think that people don't understand is when you say, for example, take Africa. Africa is current in February month up to 20,000, right? And you might, if you weren't paying attention, you might think, okay, every case under 20,000 has been interviewed by the end of February. And that just isn't the case. So we need to talk about the data to be able to sort of figure out what is and isn't the case. There is a file of data here on the SEAC site, on the Save Diversity Visa site from the SEAC data. It only goes up to current ranges. So in other words, there are some cases which have been scheduled above the current number. That's a complete mistake. It shouldn't have happened, but it did happen in a number of cases. And I've talked about what will happen with those cases, right? But if we just look at the cases that are real case numbers that are not holes under each region, and figure out how many of those cases have actually been interviewed and how many should be interviewed, I think you'll begin to understand the trouble we're in. So when I download that data, I get the data into a spreadsheet. I'm just going to show you the spreadsheet. I'm just going to talk you through the numbers a little bit. But you can figure out, let me just show you a couple of things here. First of all, you can filter on one particular company. Let me take OC on one particular region, right? And what you do need to do is take out, you can leave in the at MVC. So if you want to know all of the actual cases, you take out the cases which have a status of none. They're holes, they're gaps in between the numbers, right? And I've explained how that works. And as I say, I'm hoping if you're listening to this video, you already understand how and why, what holes are and how they get created and so on. But if we look at that and we say, okay, how many cases are below, and we're just looking at OC, right? How many cases are there up to the 850 number, which is the current number for that region in February, right? So we'll go down to that point, 850. Now, if the number is at 850, anything below that point can be interviewed, right? Not case number 850, but anything below that point. And so if I just go and sort of mark them all, we've got, no, that's not right. Hang on, where are we? MVC, I've marked them all. That's dopey. Hang on a second. What did I do that for? Oh, working with this other screen drives me nuts. Okay. All right. Let me get back to the 850. Okay. From 850 up, how many cases are there? That's really what I want to show you, right? So from case number 847, and we go to home, right? That gives us 476 cases, right? In OC. Now, you can then say, okay, how many of those cases are actually scheduled? They're either in refused status, issued status, they're ready, they're in transit, one of those, right? All you need to do is turn off the cases which are at MVC and see what you're left with. And in that case, I'm left with 70 cases. That means 70 cases out of 476 cases that could have been scheduled up until the end of February have been scheduled or have already been interviewed. That's the number, right? Now, we would expect, roughly speaking, about 2/3 of the 476 to want to be issued, to want to be interviewed, right? What I mean by that is, and I call this the response rate, only 2/3 of all winners, roughly speaking, depending on the country and depending on the situation of the year and all sorts of things, roughly 2/3 of the cases will want to proceed with their cases. A lot of people won't want to proceed with their cases. In fact, the response rate in OC, for example, is probably going to be lower than 65%. But let's just say it's 50%, right? Out of the 476 cases, that means that, 235 of those cases definitely will want to be interviewed, right? Even if we're going with a 50% number, it's probably more than that. It's probably 300 and something. But if we say 235 cases, they'll want to be interviewed. They're already current. Only 70 have been interviewed or scheduled. So there's a difference between the 70 and the 235, and that number could easily be 300. Those people have yet to be scheduled, and they will be scheduled, and they will take precedence over new current cases and will affect the pace of the VB moving in Oceania. That's how it works. When they're trying to set the new VB number, they figure out how many cases do they have that are documentarily qualified and already current, and what's the capacity, and then if the capacity is more than this number, right? If they've got 200 cases are documentarily qualified and they've got capacity for 300 cases, great. All those 200 cases can get interviewed, and they'll move the VB number enough so that they get another 100 cases that are already documentarily qualified, and they can use the capacity of 300. If, on the other hand, they've got 200 cases and their capacity is only 150, there really is no need for them to move the VB number in that given month, and they probably won't, right? That's the impact of the cases which are already current and not yet interviewed, but they are documentarily qualified, right? So, so we don't know how many of those cases are documentarily qualified, but we do know that 235 of them, as an absolute minimum in Oceania, will want to be qualified, right? Okay, so I did the same exercise in each of the regions, and I'll give you the numbers now so that you can sort of consider that. So in Africa, cases up to 20,000, case number 20,000, there are 11,630 cases, which are real cases. And so far, they've scheduled or interviewed 512 of those cases, right? So if we go on the same 50% number, they should have, there's 5,500 people as a minimum that should be documentarily qualified already and should be interviewed that are already current. And they've only scheduled 512 out of those 5,500 and 5,800, nearly 6,000 cases. I'm just going on the 50% number, right? So you can see the problem. There's thousands of cases in Africa that are already entitled to their interview because they're already current. They're probably documentarily qualified, or they're becoming documentarily qualified quite soon. And they will take the lion's share of the capacity, right, going forward. That's how it will work. So there really is no need for them to increase the visa bulletin number in Africa very much. Now, they might do. I'm not going to try and predict it. I don't know quite how the government are going to operate that. But there isn't any technical need for them to do that if they've been doing their job correctly on the DS260 processing. In EU, the same numbers, same principle. There are 9,729 cases that are actual real cases, and 956 of them have been scheduled. Not quite as bad as Africa, but still pretty bloody awful. Asia region, there are 5,142 real cases. 288 of them have been scheduled, right, of current cases. There are additionally, in all of these numbers, there are some numbers that are not current yet that shouldn't have been scheduled that are, but I'm not talking about those. I'm just talking about the cases that are already current, right? In South America, there are 728 real cases and 72 of those have been scheduled. So, you know, half all of those numbers that I just gave you, 11,630 in Africa, 9,729 in EU, 5,142 in Asia, 728 in South America, and 476 in Oceania. Assume 50% of the people have submitted their DS260 and should have been documentarily qualified by now. That's the real demand for interviews of people that are already current. And the amount of people who have been scheduled is roughly 10% of each region, roughly. Not even that in Africa, right? You can see the problem, right? It's important to understand the data before we make sort of silly, you know, God will protect me, or I feel lucky this year, or my auntie who lives in America now after winning the lottery in 1968, you know, some bullshit story I'm being told. You know, those things are not necessarily accurate. Data doesn't lie, okay? And a little bit of common sense is what you need to be using, not dream world. So have a look at the data yourselves. The data is available to all of you. Have a look at these visualizations, which will tell you about capacity. It will tell you about how things will work through the year in a normal year. And once you understand the capacity, once you understand where we are with the current numbers, you'll get to a better picture of what's got to happen. I've been telling people fairly consistently that I think we need frankly, a lot of interviews. We need about, let me just switch back to this. We need about between 3,000 and 4,000 interviews per month to be scheduled from March onwards. If they don't do that, then it's just not going to be a very good outcome. And we've had 2,500 cases scheduled in 2 months, January and February. So I'm not very hopeful, frankly. They're suddenly going to turn around and start interviewing 4,000 cases or even 3,000 cases in March, frankly. But they need to. And the other thing is, as I mentioned on another video today, the DV2020 cases and to some extent DV2021 are going to impact on this process too later on this year. And, you know, despite the government's plan, it's not clear how they're expecting embassies to cope with that additional capacity, you know, without some real effort. So they need to be putting the effort in now. Okay, everybody, I hope that's useful. I've gone through a number of things with you. I hope that was interesting and useful. Please let me know your comments. Let me know, you know, what do you think about this? You know, you may have your own theories on how this is going to work out, etc. I'd be interested in hearing about that. But anyway, keep well. Please subscribe to the channel. Give me a thumbs up, like, or let me know if you hate this video, whatever. You know, just give me a reaction to this video if you can. That'd be great. All right. Thanks then. Bye-bye.